Good day and welcome. In this short video, I would like to cover our palette of futures literacy. This would be useful in the cognate field of futures thinking and strategic foresight. And the palette essentially is a mapping of the types of skills or competencies that may be required in doing useful futures work. So if we begin in the inner circle, you'll notice a set of competencies. I'll describe each one in turn, and then we will try and have an integrated look at the Pallette of Futures Literacy. So if we begin with on the right-hand side in the inner circle, we can think about it as visual thinking. And this is the ability to be able to think visually, to be able to capture our thoughts, our ideas, our perspectives in the form of diagrams, graphics, and iconic thinking. If we move down to the right, data generation. Futures work requires us to engage in data collection and generating data either through the form of research, through the form of dialogue as we share our skills, as we share our perspectives in groups. If we proceed, the ability to deal with uncertainty in relation to data. So in working with futures and strategic foresight, we find that we would be generating large masses of data in what might be seen in an unorganized way. And this can seem overwhelming, and therefore we need to have the capacity to deal with the uncertainty of all the myriads of data that gets generated. To work through that uncertainty, we need the skills and the competence of data reduction. So we would need to find ways of organizing the data, of making linkages, of finding themes, and there's a range of tools that we can use to do that. With all of that, we also want to be essentially draw on our capacities for sense making. And that's the idea that we work with data in a way that allows us to bring our interpretations to bear to make sense of the data and what that means for the world around us. World making is the capacity to think of alternate worlds. So when we're doing futures work and foresight, strategic foresight, it's about having multiple plausible futures and which represent different worlds in which we will inhabit, or our organizations will inhabit, or our communities will inhabit. So world making is the capacity to be able to conceive of multiple plausible worlds that we would then call each of those futures. If we move to the outer circle, I would like to draw on some of the other capacities and competencies that helps us in futures work. And you will notice that some of them are in tension with each other, or they make one focus on the one hand and in tension with one of the other capacities. So as an example, if we start with the top left, analytic, this is the capacity to be able and the competency to take a phenomenon, to break it down, decompose it into its constituent parts and analyze each of those parts. On the other hand, systemic is the notion of wholes, so not taking things apart, but in the drawing on the opposite of analysis, which is synthesis, and taking that together so we see the integrated relationships between the variables, between the data, and so on. We can then move to the capacity or the competency of diagnostics, and here what we are referring to the ability to be able to look at problematic areas, problematic situations, and to be able to diagnose the key issues which we then engage in problem framing and define as problems. The other aspect that's common in most futures work, most approaches to doing futures work, is the ability to construct our worlds. So we're using world making, but to represent those worlds in the form of narrative. So we are writing up, we are expressing, we are representing these multiple future worlds in the form of narratives. And here we would also draw, for example, on skills around storytelling and narrative generation. Map making is the idea that we can take our visual thinking and to be able to conceive of drawing conceptual maps of how the future unfolds and what the futures, eventually emergent futures, might look like. We would also draw on the capacities of imagination, because futures work is not entirely left brain. It's a combination of integrated left brain and right brain thinking, and we draw on our capacities of imagination to imagine worlds that do not yet exist, imagine futures that are very different from the current futures, and to make sense of that in a way that gives us meaning that we can then respond to in relation to those worlds. Um, in conjunction with imagination is the capacity to have a sense of aesthetic, a sense of flair, and this is largely from the point of view of when we are representing our futures, for others to be able to, to be engaged with the futures. So we take the narrative that we have the ability to write narrative, but we convert that in the forms of representation, which also draws on sense of aesthetic beauty and form that makes these alternate worlds engaging for the users, for those that are going to respond to the worlds, the futures that we generate. And finally, time flexing on the top right is this ability to flex our minds to think in time in multiple ways. We can think in linear time, we can think in circular time, we can think of as time as being multiple. And it's also the capacity to see the tensions as well as the consonance between the short term and the long term. The other part of time flexing is to be able to identify what our time horizons are in relation to the futures that we are generating. So this is the Palette of Futures Literacy is showing us all of the capacities and the competencies as people who work in futures and in working with strategic foresight that we can draw on. It doesn't mean that every individual has to have all of these capacities, but in the team we are drawing on all of these capacities. So that's our palette of futures literacies, and until our next video, see you next time. Thank you very much.